do you think there is any sort of intentional effort to seed misleading figures or narratives into the community for any purpose?
Intentional efforts are underway, I would say. Those intentional efforts would include financial incentives, because there is a growing population that are interested in this, and you can leverage all kinds of ways to create financial incentives for people to present on this topic. There's also religious incentives. We've kind of discussed that that's a very well-established community around the world. Like with the Tic Tac incident, that was detected, and then that didn't just disappear immediately so that there wasn't a long encounter, right? It actually paced the craft.
Right.
There was a
anticipated the cap point, the rendezvous point. So there's kind of like an interplay. Like, are they kind of like encouraging us along, and as we take certain strides, make certain leaps, they want to engage, test those capabilities, see what the interface might be,
and show that they have mastery in that domain, right?
Right.
Like,
it's not a clear show of force is very inherent in some of these incursions.
One that's not too recent is the 1976 Iranian Tehran incident that happened at night. There was a UFO that was flying over this very populated capital city of Iran. Okay. And this UFO encounter lasted hours. The citizens of the city lost power to their, city. When it only really happened once Tehran scrambled 2 fighter aircraft to intercept this object that was, flying with impunity in their airspace. And a smaller object was emitted from it and went and landed on like a mountaintop nearby. During this encounter, pilots themselves said that their instrumentation and their communications instruments stopped working when they approached the object closer, and they also couldn't fire on this thing. They had to actually evade and then be like up to a mile or 2 away until that stuff came back. The people on the ground were, this was a mass witness sighting.
Hello and welcome to Emergent. My name is Reed Summers. Every 2 weeks, we examine the front lines of the UAP UFO phenomenon and the greater implications of humanity's contact with a potential non-human intelligence. Joining me today is a special guest, Darcy Weir. Darcy is a documentary filmmaker who, over the past 2 decades, has chosen to explore some of the most intriguing topics of discussion today, including UFOs, cryptids, and even Bitcoin. He has completed over 15 feature-length documentaries on these topics, all of which are available on Amazon Prime and Apple. His goal is to make the world of UFOs more accessible to the general public by shedding light on the subject in new ways. Diving into the chaos of UFO Twitter like a fearless spelunker, every week, enjoy fresh conversations with him on Twitter or KGRA Radio regarding UFO news. It's my pleasure to have Darcy on the show today. Together, we're going to look at his newest 2 films. The first is called Dark Alliance, the inside story of the Cosmic Con. And the second is called Pascagoula 73, which examines the alleged abduction of Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, and Maria Blair. We're also going to be discussing Darcy's journey into UFO investigation and filmmaking, the problem of misinformation within the UFO community, some theories of NHI being an origin, the future of UFO media and research, and then we'll be getting Darcy's take on the current events in disclosure. So with that, Darcy, let's bring you on stage. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, man. Happy to be here.
Great to be here with you.
Well, I feel like you could be part of the Fantastic Four, but in the UFO community. Dr. Reed.
No. Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, I've got the bald head for it, I guess. So
there you go.
Ready to go. Well, how are you? How's life?
Life's good. It's busy and, just getting through a winter in Canada here, which is bitterly cold. But other than that, staying alive and just doing my work.
Well, I appreciate your work, and I've benefited from your films, and I think you're doing important documentary investigation that is benefiting the UFO community and the public. So thank you for all 15 of your films. Have not seen them all, but I'm dipping in over time. So quite a journey.
Varying quality throughout. I mean, I've been doing this off and on for, like you said before, 2 decades. I was in this, researching this and working on putting together feature-length exposés of certain things. But I feel like the quality is going up over time, just
Good.
As an independent creator yourself, there's so many easy ways to create content and really enhance your work these days. So I'm taking advantage of it as much as I can.
Well, good. Step by step. And share with everyone how you got interested in this whole anomalous, bizarre, and enigmatic issue of UFOs and the phenomenal nature of their interactions with humanity.
I think it was a combination of boredom and curiosity. So boredom being I wasn't doing enough with my hours in life back when I was like 20, 21. And I'm 40 years old now. I've been checking all this stuff out for a while. And when I first came across like the idea of UFOs or extraterrestrials or aliens or whatever, that was from probably a mainstream Hollywood content production of some kind, like whether we're talking X-Files on a Sunday night with my family or, I don't know, Independence Day or something like that, like, a fiction film. But as I got older, I was in a university eventually, boarding in a city in Canada, and YouTube had kind of blown up early on, and I saw a documentary on there about this type of stuff. I think my older brother sent me one of the original ones, and I kind of was like, whoa, is there something to all this stuff being a reality and not just, some kind of fictional production that was presented to us from Hollywood? The content that I was shown were real life UFO videos. And if you watch a lot of my productions, they're mostly UFO video documentaries. Like I take cases where people saw UFOs and I do an expose on that, or I look at actual videos that have been caught on a camera from a civilian or, whatever. So what I'm saying is the very first content I was ever exposed to that was regarding this possibly being real was from a gentleman named Jose Escamilla, who's no longer with us. And I remember I wrote him an email when I was about 20 or something like that and said, hey, I saw your documentary, UFOs, the greatest truth never told, or something like that. I'm probably messing up the name. And in that documentary, he had people that were present at Roswell and people that told stories about how they shot a UFO video on camera and how they, had witnessed that whole phenomenon before they started recording and stuff. So then I was like, whoa, like, what's this all about? And I started entering the rabbit hole, so to speak. But I only started creating my own content in like 2009. I started working on a documentary. I was interviewing anybody I could find that was linked to this guy named Phil Schneider, who is also no longer with us, but he had an untimely death, and there was a lot of controversy surrounding his death. I will say that, when that story was first presented to me by a friend, I thought that everything about it was true. And as I said, I was younger and I was more naive, and I was probably going through some level of shock when I was first exposed to this stuff, because it is a shocking topic to think that we're not alone. There's a secret being kept by the powers that be, which is like usually military or intelligence related. And therefore this truth that's kept from us keeps us held back consciously and possibly technologically, right? That's always part of the conversation. So I guess you would say early on, I was vulnerable because of this shock. And when you're vulnerable, you're more susceptible to hoaxes, to, illogical thought. You might take on things that you wouldn't originally take on when you're a bit more of a skeptic. And so that first documentary, I believed all of it. And then it's called The Underground. I got to work with Richard Dolan for the first time, interviewed him remotely and, put that in there. And I interviewed this guy that wrote books about underground bases being built around the world and this being very secretive. Richard Sauter, Cynthia Dreyer, the ex-wife of Philip Schneider. And, I put that together as like a feature-length film. And since then, I've done a lot of speaking about how, that film's published and it's owned by a distributor. But since then, I've, spoken out that I don't know if Philip told everything that was true, but I think he was influenced by things that were already there, including his father, who might have actually had links to Project Paperclip and stuff like that. Right. As a German scientist that was brought. I
wanted to ask. So yeah, you were young and impressionable, or maybe vulnerable at that moment. But how do you view that case today, in retrospect?
Yeah, in retrospect, I would say my mind has changed a lot, as anybody's should that gets more information on a case. They should be able to present newer and truer findings. Anybody who just firmly sticks their feet in the ground and resists new ideas towards theories, they're not doing any service to themselves, and they're not doing any service to the greater truth of this phenomenon, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it's real and we go collect the data should signify the reality that we suspect is true, or it should rule it out. So it should cause us to rethink our positions.
Exactly.
Want to get your just kind of surveying your work as a filmmaker. What moments, cases, insights, information really stand out as the most eye-opening, the most confirmatory of the phenomenon for you?
Well, the most eye-opening cases, I think, are tied to military encounters. So, for example, one that's not too recent is the 1976 Iranian Tehran incident that happened at night. There was a UFO that was flying over this very populated capital city of Iran. This was at a time that actually the United States and Iran had better relationships. It was before, I believe, the takeover of the Supreme Ayatollah. Right. And this UFO encounter lasted hours. The citizens of the city lost power to their, city. So there was all these physical things that were happening.
Lost power, like in a small part of the city, or more like broad urban blackout?
It was a blackout.
Wow. Okay.
When it only really happened once Tehran scrambled 2 fighter aircraft to intercept this object that was, flying with impunity in their airspace. And a smaller object was emitted from it and went and landed on like a mountaintop nearby. And during this encounter, the air traffic controllers, the people on the ground, as well as the pilots, witnessed all kinds of things happening. So the pilots themselves said that their instrumentation and their communications instruments stopped working when they approached the object closer, and they also couldn't fire on this thing. They had to actually evade and then be like up to a mile or 2 away until that stuff came back. And the people on the ground were, this was a mass witness sighting. And then, later that week, the American Air Force flew over and they were debriefed by the Iranian officials within the military there, everything that happened. So that's kind of like a home run case, in my opinion. And we have,
to my knowledge, it went as far as a second jet was attempted to intercept the craft and even tried to discharge its firearms upon it unsuccessfully. Yeah. So it went that far.
Yeah, it was a real military engagement with an object that just went wrong in every way. And, then you fast forward to today, there's multiple military engagements that the American military has carried out. And we hear of eyewitness testimony about those engagements from Ryan Graves, Tim Gallaudet, and multiple, like David Fravor, all of these pilots and military personnel that were witness to UAPs over the oceans. And then further to that, you have, the Tic Tac incident on the west coast of the United States in that ocean, in which, Kevin Day and all of these military personnel were present and witnessed this phenomenon themselves. I think those standout cases, to me, present the idea that we're not alone. We're not the masters of our domain, and possibly our domain includes the oceans, the atmosphere of the sky, and then above that in space. And I did a docu-series on UFOs or anomalies in space that were present during the X-15 Mercury Gemini missions and the Apollo space missions in that order. And then later on, I did one called Fast Walkers, which is about everything that came after the Apollo missions, right through the STS, the space shuttle missions, which were used by NASA to build the International Space Station.
Quite a broad sweep of research you've done and analysis. I'm curious, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of the UFO phenomenon, either within the UFO community or in the public? What are people just not understanding per what you understand it to be?
Yeah, I am a nuts and bolts kind of researcher. So for me, when people start talking about consciousness and a intangible connection to the UAPs, the occupants of the UAPs, and the phenomenon itself. Like right now, we have a lot of conversation going around in the community about psionics, right? This is a new term. It just kind of came out of, came from pop culture before that. It was actually discussed in comic books and stuff, believe it or not, if you look into it. And then all of a sudden it's like this mainstream or UFO community term. Consciousness is something not fully understood by science yet. We know that it's connected partly to our brain. And then there's this sort of intangible thing that's going on, that our mind is interacting with the environment around us. And to me, there has to be something scientific to prove how consciousness exists, both in our bodies, our brains, and outside of our bodies. Like, that's I guess you would say, the extrasensory perception part of consciousness. And I think people mix those experiences, those the unarticulated scientifically experiences, with their own perception of spirituality, religion, and metaphysics, basically.
Yeah, I hear you there. I almost wonder if a more compartmentalized approach could be taken, where we can deal with the physical phenomenon, because it is a hard physical reality by all accounts, and not try to make it all one and the same, and blend it all together into kind of like a grand explanation of very different phenomenon that may not be actually connected directly.
Yeah, and we might be dealing with a plethora of phenomenon. When you hear the testimony that goes back to, say, like David Grush, he was saying that there might be, extraterrestrials, like literally beings from another star in the galaxy. There might be interdimensional explanations for some of the phenomenon, and how that works, I don't know. I mean, I know that we are apparently operating on a 3D plane of existence, three-dimensional. But hey, there's a possibility of many greater dimensions above the third dimension. Scientifically, we just don't know how to interact with that. And I think what technology is catching up with is the ability to interact with that, or at least observe those things. And I think when we see things in FLIR,
forward-looking infrared,
sorry, or ultraviolet cameras, which in space, NASA's been using ultraviolet space cameras for many decades now. We're seeing into a dimension possibly that the human eye cannot perceive, and the brain therefore never has access to. So that's where I think, because these things are not really well articulated or explained in science, and also, let's be honest, there's stigma surrounding that. We haven't had people like Avi Loeb representing this subject scientifically for a very long time. It's a very new sort of epoch. And therefore, the mainstream scientific community has always turned their back on the idea that there's other things out there beyond our perception to explain for UFO phenomenon and non-human intelligence, therefore. And I think, even the idea of the shadow biosphere, which might always be around us, that we don't get to interact with because of our limited perception physically. Technology, especially those types of visual technologies I just talked about, but detectors of electromagnetic spectrums, and on top of that, artificial intelligence that's eventually going to be kind of implemented into our lives more and more going forward. I think that's going to be the bridge to understanding the universe around us a lot more.
Right. Great thoughts there. And I almost wonder if the UFO community grappling with the more non-physical aspects of the phenomenon, the psi aspects, surmising that must therefore mean that these craft or the entities controlling them might not be physical. They might be interdimensional or angelic. that therefore kind of confuses it even worse for the public, where they're now looking at what truthfully might be a hard alien phenomenon, but the community of researchers focused on it are starting to talk about, angels and things that are non-physical, when there is a physicality to focus on right there. So I wonder if, there could be kind of like a Rubicon, a crossing, where, science being able to enable our detection of realities outside the visual spectrum, and the UFO community's experience of this phenomenon outside the visual spectrum start to collide and converge, such that modern science can potentially entertain the possibility of these psi effects without disparaging or deriding the entirety of the UFO phenomenon. So interesting times.
Yeah, definitely. And just to your point on sort of this spirituality connotations related to the phenomenon, it reminds me a bit of a like cargo cult situation, where we were a civilization or a society that was not fully aware of these types of things happening. And then we get a full dose of this reality. And we already had some notions before about how the world worked. So we're applying our notions of how the world formally worked to that experience that we just had, which is anomalous, right?
Right.
And I think we're still at that stage. And I think a lot of these senators and congressmen and women who are kind of tackling this stuff on Capitol Hill right now, legislatively, and, in a, let's say, like a public media discourse sort of way, they are useful to broadening this discussion to their base. So when they call, when they turn around and say, I just got briefed in a skiff or something, I can't talk about everything that I was, briefed on, but I believe that this phenomenon is angelic or demonic. When they say that, they're trying to say to their base, which is a very Christian base, let's say, there's something here, folks, right? Right. And it might start there, but it doesn't end there. It's like a way of raising awareness. And as we get further along in this topic, and maybe people like Luna Paulina and their team that's looking at the secrecy surrounding JFK and 9/11 and the UAP topic, if they unveil more stuff and they get the keys to accessing the truth of this, and they bring some more of that to the public to buy back some of that trust between the citizens and the government that's supposed to serve them, we might get material that is more scientific to identify this. And that's the stuff that I will connect with. But they might give stuff to a community that's Christian or spiritual or what have you. And those people will get things that reaffirm their belief systems, but it doesn't mean, that that's the truth. It's just people are going to prescribe or identify certain things about this phenomenon that they already had preconceived.
Right. I mean, it's almost like, authority figures will choose the path of ontological least resistance to try to at least bring people from impossibility to possibility, to allow them to entertain this as a reality. And then hopefully there's a down selection process to the hard physical nature of craft and entities potentially. I want to back up real quick to this issue of cargo cults. A fascinating term. It actually originates in World War II in the Pacific theater of the war, when Native peoples observed Allied forces coming ashore with, quote, cargo, or cargo washing up ashore. And they tried to interpret the meaning of such cargo as coming from a higher plane, such as we might do with UAP, coming from a higher plane of existence or reality, and then tried to mimic whatever processes might arise or give rise to that cargo. And so kind of like trying to mimic the technological reality, the paradigmatic reality that was so beyond them in their own local sphere. So I can imagine some of those same impulses societally as we come to terms with this reality of non-human intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the same sort of phenomenon existed when the Spaniards set sail and landed on what we now know as North America or the United States and Canada, that geographical location in the world. Mm-hmm. The indigenous people of the Native Americans were on the shores of the East Coast when the first ships arrived. And for what has been told historically about their encounters at first with the Spaniards was that they were looking out at the ocean, and these massive wood ships were sailing towards the shore for days. And when they first appeared on the horizon, they were, very hard to see, but there was something there large, right? And it was only like the chief or the chiefs of these tribes that were articulating to the rest of the tribe that they could see something. So it's like the thought leader of that group was on the lookout and was like, oh, there's something actually coming. The rest of the tribe members were so, I guess, their brains were not ready to even perceive that approach. Right. That when they looked out, they actually couldn't see the ships. Yeah. When the ships finally came within like striking distance of the ground, that's when everybody could see them. The chief was passing on something was coming earlier. Mm-hmm. And when they first met these white people, they thought, oh my God, these are gods. These are like, aliens. All kinds of theories were being passed around these tribes. Fast forward to now, the indigenous people lost their land. They learned greater truths about these foreigners the hardest way possible. And I think even with this phenomenon, there's a lot of things we can learn about those interactions, because there are thought leaders already in the community that say those things that have interacted with our planet, UFOs are apparently the occupants of the craft, are angelic. They're good. They're here to save us from ourselves, yada, yada, yada. Right. Don't listen to all the fear. Then there's other thought leaders that say it's a mix. There's probably some good guys. There's some bad guys, so there's all kinds of that sort of the chiefs of disclosure or thought processes regarding this are interacting with our community and the mainstream society in this topic. And people are having to try and decipher it for themselves or follow one leader or the other. So yeah, that's the way I kind of look at it.
Yeah, it's a treacherous thing to be the natives being discovered, and here we are ontologically ill prepared, and it's almost as if there's an evolutionary disadvantage at play where, we may exist in the NHI's paradigm. They've observed us, they detected us, they've been watching, presumably studying us, but they don't exist in our paradigm. And, Ross Coulthardt's book, In Plain Sight, there's the phenomenon, right? It's global, it's pervasive, it's longstanding. There's so much to indicate that there's a there, and society looks and they cannot see a there. And there could be some kind of psychological, even neurofiltering going on in this first contact that we might be having with a non-human intelligence. So that's why, folks have to be in the game like yourself to help educate and inform people with the best information. I want to change topics over to talk about your two documentaries, and then we can come back and talk about kind of the state of the UFO conversation, disclosure, what might be coming next. So recently you released a documentary called Dark Alliance, the Inside Story of the Cosmic Con. If you can give us just a skinny on that, and then we can kind of break down maybe some of the dynamics at play that give rise to trends like you have documented in this film.
Okay, sure. So back in 2021, I was invited to speak at a conference. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. But I was invited to speak at UFO MegaCon And this was held in Laughlin, Nevada, just north of Vegas. I got to sort of present on some of my ideas or findings within the UFO community. And, early on, I was basically trying to say we got to be aware of the thought leaders that are presenting certain information regarding this phenomenon and try to keep it factual and not be taken, so to speak, logically by their comments and follow them, right? So then after that, I started interviewing people that were surrounding the whole spectacle of this new age secret space program theory that was presented on Gaia TV on a show called Cosmic Disclosure. And the thought leaders and the presenters, the entertainers on that entertainment network were David Wilcock and Corey Goode. These guys were propped up by a network, an entertainment network that has millions of followers globally. And many people were complete believers of this topic and I'll break it down for you. Basically, Corey Goode had entered the scene initially on chat forums, kind of like 4chan for ufology.
This is great. I'm really curious. How did this happen? Like what's the ramp up to a state of affairs like the one you depicted in the documentary?
Right. So through research, and it wasn't all on my own. It was with a group of people looking into this. We found that there were these chat forums. They're still around. You can still log into these and go into certain topics and chat with people and swap ideas and theories. But they were initially it was called Project Camelot. That branched off and became two sites, Project Avalon and Project Camelot. And people that were part of these chat forums would just murmur and discuss. And Bill Ryan, who started up both sites, but ended up sticking to Project Avalon as his main site. Kerry Cassidy being, kind of the administrator and owner of the former site, Project Camelot. They were interviewing all of these interesting people that were saying they were insiders or whistleblowers that knew the greater truth about the UFO phenomenon and so on and so forth. And I, as I said, early on was being swept up in all of this stuff, right? I had done the Phil Schneider story. I actually did one of my very first interviews with Kerry Cassidy on Project Camelot back in the day when that doc first hit like YouTube in its first incarnation. So I'm connected to that, community from early on. And I had heard about Corey Goode back in the day too, and was like, this guy's making really bold claims. But we find out that a lot of his claims were kind of farmed from existing UFO community themes or tropes that were part of these different conspiracy theories. And we know that because Bill Ryan, he kind of, as the site administrator and web admin for his own site, he watched the IP address for Corey Goode going around his forum and interacting with people in the underground base area or the secret space program chat board or, extraterrestrial intelligence, galactic federation, all of these sort of ideas. And then he launched his character as this secret space astronaut that was fighting wars with reptilians and stuff, both originally on that chat forum. He got noticed by David Wilcock, who was a well-established entertainer and presenter on the Gaia TV network. And then David Wilcock brought Corey Goode over to Gaia TV. And that's where he further propelled into stardom in the UFO community. by having 3 seasons of a show with David Wilcock called Cosmic Disclosure. And they would further refine all of these themes and stories that were being presented, as I said, by Corey Goode, that came out of the UFO community. Right. And you can jump in any time here if I'm kind of going.
No, it sounds so. Just to recap, it sounds like there's an existing entertainment industry set up, and there are existing thought leaders, presenters, entertainers, and maybe someone goes on a forum in kind of the corners of the community and starts making really garish claims, stitching together, lore and other possible storylines from other possible whistleblowers or, claimants from the past, and they get picked up. And it's a great yarn. It goes out there. People love it. I'm sure the metrics are positive, and therefore they run with it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Fast forwarding further than that, Gaia TV became so popular because of these guys that their stock was just kind of flying through the roof on, the New York. I think it's
they are.
Not quite sure which exchange, but they were doing well with investors. And Corey and David kind of presented the idea to the board there, like, we want to be part owners, or we want shares of the company. We want more than just, our pay per episode. I know this because I ended up speaking to the former head of production over at Gaia, Jay Widener. And Jay was open to speaking to me in this docu-series because he ended up in a public court battle between Corey Goode and himself. Mm-hmm. Corey Goode and David didn't get what they wanted from Gaia in those conversations. They left that company. They had intentions, I think, to start their own entertainment network. This is what Leon Isaac Kennedy, a African-American Hollywood actor who also is featured in the docu-series, told me. And they made their own documentaries that were published through a company called 1091 Films. These were called Above Majestic and Cosmic Secret. Above Majestic has like a reptilian pope on the front of the poster. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of those was to further expand on the lore and the tales that they wanted to tell about a secret space program, alien interactions, where we came from. They basically say in Cosmic Secret that we were aliens from Mars that came to Earth after some kind of cataclysmic thing. And I think there's deeper elements to that story.
I'm sure it gets further out there. I have 2 questions, and I'm very curious about this because you did a deep dive. I've not done a deep dive on these 2 individuals. But what are the core dynamics at play within the UFO community that allow this to happen, that allow these characters to come on the stage, woo people, make claims that are completely unsubstantiated, and weave a tale that really deludes at least the UFO public, if not the public. And if anything else, discredits the UFO community and topic from the public. Like, what is at play here dynamically, do you think?
There's a bunch of things, and I think we've already kind of covered the mental state that I was even in when I was younger and first exposed to these theories and ideas. You go through a type of ontological shock when you find out about possible realities to do with this phenomenon. And when you're going through that, you're basically in shock, like you're vulnerable. You're trying to understand the world around you because the mainstream does not onboard any of these ideas. Like, they're all considered lunacy. Right. So you're feeling vulnerable, and because of that, you're trying to belong to something. You're trying to reach out or interact with communities in which you connect with, and you feel like you're not alone. And that's how people end up murmuring or moving towards these kind of thought leaders that present these ideas. Now, previous to these guys coming forward, there were not really popular people in the UFO community that stood up and said, I know the truth. We're actually, interacting with a galactic federation of aliens, and we're fighting the bad ones. And, there's some people going into space to be part of this and others that are not, and everybody else is asleep. No one had really done that before, made these very aggressive pronouncements about their own truth regarding the phenomenon. So it went from being, are we not alone? What are the UFOs? Are they ours or theirs? Where are they from if they're not ours? To somebody very emphatically saying, I know all the truths and here they are. Right. And so because that happened, and you have groups of people that are waiting for the right answer, they're vulnerable, they're going through probably some kind of shock in life regarding this issue, they clamor together and follow people like this. Right. And that will not stop. I feel like it's going to happen as the decades progress in the future, because there's just going to be people that always offer their own brand of truth regarding this phenomenon. Maybe not all of it is true. And they're here for different reasons. It could be financial incentives. It could be just the reinforcement and the feeling of being important and popular. There's all kinds of reasons that people may carry out this type of behavior. But, from a sociological perspective, looking at it from the outside, even though your head is already in the community, it feels like a social phenomenon, right?
Right.
And
it's going to be a wash. It's going to be a rinse and repeat, like you're saying, where there's this in the absence of real, verifiable, a bank of evidence that can be used to verify claims in this kind of gray zone, which is what this has become, unfortunately, due to the obfuscation and the ridicule factor generated by government, society. It allows for this space to exist where there's kind of a narrative escalation. Who's going to be the one to make the even bigger claim? And, credible people will go X far, less credible thus far, but then there will always be some individuals who will go way beyond what anyone would normally say and do. And there will be a certain percentage that will follow them and who are vulnerable because of the truth that there is a disinformation, misinformation campaign, which can always be leveraged to justify one's narrative as well. Yeah.
And so your original question was, what kind of environment, what elements are at play in order for something like this to take off? And you just listed basically the last element, which is there's an environment created by even the powers that be that allow for this thing to take off because of the secrecy, because of the obfuscation of the whole topic. It gets relegated to chat forums and conspiracy theories, and there's very little facts to support certain evidence. So people just go, all right, whatever. I'm checking out of mainstream reality in terms of engaging with this thought process on the phenomenon. I'm just going to check in with these folks that are saying they know.
Right.
Even though
that's so fascinating, this rejection of the mainstream, because I've seen this a lot, and it's like, it's wholesale. It's like the mainstream is not only deluded and ignorant, but they're brainwashed, right? They're being controlled. And then that causes you to leap out of, quote, reality, to reject it and to embrace somebody else's manufactured reality. And there are people who are manufacturing a complete three-dimensional set of parameters by which to assess who you are, where you belong. And so this kind of societal rejection, and I've termed it, it's almost like a psychological corralling. It's, it's like getting people to reject society and corral themselves willingly inside a tighter and tighter pen of narrative kind of bounding. regarding life itself, which worries me. And my next question was, do you think there is any sort of intentional effort to seed misleading figures or narratives into the community for any purpose?
Yeah. So intentional efforts are underway, I would say. Those intentional efforts would include financial incentives, because there is a growing population that are interested in this, and you can leverage all kinds of ways to create financial incentives for people to present on this topic. There's also religious incentives. We've kind of discussed that that's a very well-established community around the world. And because there's certain people that prescribe as thought leaders and are connected to those backgrounds, they can then stand up as thought leaders representing these communities, and they can, for lack of a better word, grift upon the phenomenon and push their own brand regarding it to their community that they are already connected to, right? So, and that comes with financial incentives. I mean, you could just look at the activity behind some of these people, and it's just like, can I have donations? Can I teach you? You can
build an empire, essentially, in this new frontier environment where the truth is debatable, facts can be manufactured or claimed to be manufactured, as it were. And I'm curious, after disclosure, this has to be one of the high risk scenarios where, society awakens to this event and it's a total free for all. And like you said, there's people with existing incentives to claim this event, work it into their existing faith framework of thought or their media empire or their conspiratorial, empire, what have you. How do we as a society kind of manage the sudden awakening to this reality and keep people safe from that kind of exploitation?
I mean, just having conversations like this where people are exposed to, other ways of thinking about this are good. But you can only really look after you and yours, right? You can't save everybody because just like an addict, it's up to them to seek help or actually want to make a change. It's from within, right? So, if you're having a child or something that's entering this world, you want to make them best fit to survive in our society. So you're going to do certain things, expose them to certain things that help them flourish. And I feel like that's really the key here, is to try and provide thinking around it that helps people, and never act like you know everything. I don't know everything, but I try to connect with people that seem to be on the right track of maybe what's really going on. And all I have is my theories, and I care about the world around me, and I care about the people that are closest to me, but you can only really go so far. Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if in the future, there'll be the equivalent of like a workplace placard regarding identifying abusive relationships, right? Here are the red flags. Here are the green flags. Here's what you need to know to psychologically remain healthy and autonomous. I mean, in this same space, there's going to be a lot of people trying to claim power, prestige, money, claim the narrative. And so I think equipping people with how to think through this is going to be really key. And I think there is a way to think through it. So that's what this show is all about, actually. Well, this is fascinating, Darcy. I'm curious your take on the current state of UFO disclosure. I'm sorry, UFO discourse. Where do you see the conversation today, especially since 2017? And what are the dominant narratives? And are there any that you think are questionable or that need to be, further deconstructed?
Sure. I think there's all kinds of competing narratives. And that's where it gets really interesting because, again, there are well-established thought leaders that are competing with each other in the community. And the true powers that be, the military, the intelligence, and their third party industrial complex that services them, they actually know the truth to the phenomenon. Whether we're talking about, I don't know.
We would hope. We would hope. I mean, there's always the Collins elite and others who might be somewhat deluded as to the nature of the phenomenon, though they have access to the corridors of power.
Sure, but I think from a data and scientific perspective, the National Geospatial Agency, NSA, the CIA, the DIA, and many of these other three-letter agencies that collect data from around the world and locally on this phenomenon throughout the decades, they can impart information. And they've got a vice grip on that information, in my opinion. It seems like we've had some information trickle out from those places throughout the past. And some of the people that formerly worked with those organizations have come forward and said, yeah, there's something being hidden from the public regarding this from those places. Even David Grush came from the National Geospatial Agency and then worked on the UAP task force trying to be read into special access projects. And the Pentagon sitting kind of at the top of that power structure, which, the thought leaders there might be connected to the Collins elite, might be connected to something else. And they have,
might
they
not
don't
even call them thought leaders, but rather just the powerful and those who literally hold the information. They have a monopoly on information.
Yeah, they get the raw data. They get the funding to find the raw data. They sit in power for decades rather than 4 years or 8 years like a president does. So, that's really where I think a lot of this information lies. And what we're seeing now with, this new administration, it's very interesting because it's like, are we going to see this power struggle go down where we see the old establishment being challenged by a new establishment that's trying to unveil a lot more of the secrecy that has gone on throughout the decades? I think that's the really interesting thing that's happening. Everything that happens outside of that, to me, is going to be more of the same. But, if this really is going to be an effective administration and pushing for real answers on the secrecy of many of these things, we might enter a new era of truth and reconciliation regarding the phenomenon. Maybe. Right. Or it might just get kicked down the can, may get kicked down the road. Who knows?
I think a hybrid,
could be
no pun intended, but a hybrid reality might be one in which we get a very partial information release that shocks the world and tells a very incomplete nature, a story of the phenomenon and its nature, and therefore is kind of misleading. And so who's going to step in to fill in those gaps, to represent the entire history of the UFO reality at that moment? Because we can't trust the administration to do that necessarily.
Yeah, and we can't trust just one person in that scenario because absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? I think it would always need to be a consensus reality that needs to be come to by a group of minds, right? So if there are multiple altruistic and actual real thought leaders that enter the arena to unpack information that comes out after that kind of release, that would be the best scenario. But if it's going to be one against the other, or one that
who would those individuals be in your mind? Who would be in a position to do that?
I think there's multiple experiencers that could collaborate with former, I guess, government and intelligence related people, and I know people immediately get conspiratorial when you say, anybody who comes from intelligence or government never has really left, and they're, here to take over and disinform and misinform.
And yet they know the system, hopefully, and might be able to break it down versus a true outsider.
That's exactly my thinking. Like, you wouldn't want, if you had this epic mission to populate Mars, right? To build spaceships and send people in space on long journeys to colonize another planet. There's so many aspects of that challenge that requires new science and new breakthroughs in technology to allow for that sort of epic mission to be completed successfully, right?
Right.
So the reason I bring that up is because you don't want somebody who comes out of a chef's kitchen that's used to wielding knives for a living and cutting up and cooking things to be the thought leader or mission leader for that epic. Right. And you want somebody that you want multiple disciplines that come from scientific backgrounds, technologists, inventors, physicists. I know
the UAP Disclosure Act has this thing called the presidentially appointed review board. We'll put that on screen here. And it highlights individuals from across disciplines, inside and outside of government, insider and outsider. And, would they be in a position to, in that case, they're basically reviewing released UAP files, deciding, I believe, whether to have these released fully to the public. They're not necessarily assessing the nature of the phenomenon, the craft, the controllers. It's a question about, like, how does that enter the picture? How does government not just do a data dump on a website full of UFO information and the public, basically hair on fire? How do we put together some sort of capacity at the administration level to weed out what is really going on with the phenomenon? Its intent, for example.
Yeah, you just want multiple scientific, applied science, theoretical science, and then even governmental personnel to present this information, because they understand, like you said, if they came from a background where they understood the system in order to govern thoughts to society, they might be better to help work with this process. That's where my thinking comes towards this subject. So it's like, we're never going to get this catastrophic disclosure that people talk about, because just the idea in itself, in the term,
right? Look at the term chosen. That basically means it's a non-starter, non-option.
It's a anarchist way of having information come out. And anarchy means breaking the government or social systems in which we all operate, right? There's a reason why we have rule of law. We have, enforcers of those things in society, so that we don't all just completely break down into our primitive selves and destroy each other and ourselves. And I think controlled disclosure is pretty much going to be the only way that's going to be functional in order to evolve our thinking about this phenomenon, as well as evolve the discussion and ourselves. Because, if we are going to eventually commit to an epic, like colonizing other planets in our solar system and fanning out into, beyond our solar system as a society, we're not going to be the same human beings we started off as on the planet. We're going to become human 2.0, 3.0. AI is going to be integrated with us. Possibly we end up gene editing and so on and so forth to become more efficient and better at completing these tasks. And that might scare some people, but that might just be how organisms evolve into being intergalactic societies and that type of thing. And so
How do we suss out the NHI in that picture? Because they're here in some fashion and they're technologically capable. Are they potentially kind of seeking to shape our technological development or allow us to integrate with their technological infrastructure? But how do we manage in our own minds even just the presence of an NHI in a technological world with all of those trends underway, like you said?
Yeah. So the idea that there's been contact and experiencers had with regard to this phenomenon throughout the ages, we're talking about like paleo encounters right up to now. That seems to paint a picture that there's a non-human or an advanced intelligence that has interacted with human 1.0. And perhaps we're at the precipice of breaking through to human 2.0. And we are becoming more aware of them. I always come back to this and some other discussions. Like one of the things that you hear pilots talking about this, like Ryan Graves or David Fravor, is that they say when they were picking up these objects on their instrumentation back in 2004, 2000, right through till the Eglin Air Force Base encounter of 2023. These things are being picked up by instrumentation that was recently upgraded on the aircraft or in radar from strategic. Sorry, I'm just going to shut down that.
Yeah, no worries.
That noise. Mm-hmm. That is from military assets around the United States. And what that means to me is our technology is being constantly upgraded and better synthesized to be aware of our world around us. So we're actually becoming, from the military's perspective and possibly even the mainstream scientific perspective, eventually we're becoming more aware of a non-human intelligence or things going on in our shadow biosphere. And then they are seeing this happening. So they might even be possibly giving interactions, like with the Tic Tac incident, that was detected. And then that didn't just disappear immediately so that there wasn't a long encounter, right? It actually paced the craft.
Right.
There was a
anticipated the cap point, the rendezvous point. So there's kind of like an interplay. Like, are they kind of like encouraging us along? And as we take certain strides, make certain leaps, they want to engage, test those capabilities, see what the interface might be.
And show that they have mastery in that domain, right?
Right.
Like
it's not a clear show
of
force is very inherent in some of these incursions. Most certainly.
So I do think that we are going to become more aware. Those interactions will become, they will keep coming out to the public that they're actually happening. As Arrow was set up, they were getting 600 reports within the first year, and they could only actually decipher out of those 600, 300. So they're getting inundated by new cases. And I'm sure around the world, there's other than the United States, possibly that'll be a reality for other countries being inundated with these cases. And as we go further with this, the unveiling of these truths and so on, we may actually connect up with their ability to communicate, their ability to use technology. And that's where we're actually going to be, able to understand this stuff fully. And there's fear around that. There's also excitement around that. People probably come from different camps of understanding regarding that possible future reality, right? There's probably people out there that are like, yes, let's do it. Let's
Psionic Summit. Let's make it happen. Yard Party 2025.
Yeah.
And then others like myself, minority position, I admit, but are more cautious, Totally. Right? Before we open up broad societal open contact, do we understand the entities and have we actually assessed their behavior up to this point? Because, going back to the question of the UFO conversation, I know everyone's got their eyes turned to the government, the administration, the JFK files. They want to, maybe this is it, right? And part of me says, we don't even know how to use the evidence we've collected so far. Was that all useless? Is that all going to get overwritten because, there's a 500-page CIA document dump that rewrites our understanding of the phenomenon? We already have 80 years of evidence collection. So in part of my frustration is, are we engaged in a logical process of inquiry by which to interface with that evidence and come to incrementally more confident statements regarding what the phenomenon is and isn't, and why it's here and what it's doing with people, the intent of it. So we haven't really we haven't gotten our tracks in on this logical process by which we can come to an assessment of the phenomenon. So we're not able to assess what we have so far, and now we want more evidence. Will we be able to assess it then? Will we be just as vulnerable to being misguided in how we make conclusions about the phenomenon, even with that new evidence?
Yeah. There's all kinds of possibilities that could occur in the future regarding the phenomenon, right? I've had discussions with people where they think we'll become enslaved by their technology because their technology will connect with our technology, right? Maybe AI will go rogue and not serve us and, serve them or something like that. There's all kinds of dimensions.
And, some of that is just the hazard. It's not even like negative hostile entities. It could just be their technological world is coming on top of ours. It's more powerful and it will seed our environment with exotech that will change the course of human history, and we will become more like them in time. Right. And so, and it could be hazard, not necessarily a threat by them even. So, I think we have to be having those conversations about, what are the deleterious human impacts that could ensue from just wide open, unrestrained, unmanaged contact. And interesting stuff. So I'd like to focus now in the last part of our time together on your second documentary as we get into the nature of that contact. This was a film that you made. I think this just got released, did it not?
Yeah, in January of this year.
Okay. January. All right. So freshly out in the public. It's called Pascagoula 73, and it is about the 1973 case of alleged abduction by Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. And I'd like to share the trailer of the documentary with you all. So let's watch this, and then we'll kind of break it down together.
Normal fear is something that you expect on this earth, but this was something that wasn't supposed to even exist.
Pascagoula 73 is the case we should be concentrating on. It's almost perfect. 2 witnesses, interviews at the sheriff, interviews at the Air Force Base.
But it appeared to me that it was about 30 or 40 foot long and maybe 8 or 10 foot high.
Lots of other sightings, things seen in the river, other witnesses who were on the opposite side of the river that night.
I even asked that to him before he died. I said, do you remember me saying there's somebody out there I can see him? And he said, yes, I do. And he said, I lied about that. I did see what they said, what you see. But I didn't want people to think I was crazy.
And on we go. It even made its way into popular culture. Even Walter Cronkite covered the story.
For weeks now, there have been reports of UFO sightings in many parts of the country, but especially the Gulf Coast.
One newspaper put a sketch of a supposed extraterrestrial visitor on the front page.
His abduction and other people as well coming forward saying, I saw this, that, and the other.
I don't know what it was. I know it wasn't a plane or a helicopter.
So I opened the door after a few seconds to step out to see if I could really tell what it was. It just took off.
And the case just took off from there.
Calvin Parker, I was questioning him, and at one time he wanted to climb the wall. That's how nervous and how shook up he was. And then the examiner, he began to wonder himself. So he ran the third test, and he believed just what Mr. Hickson had told him.
So you would believe them then? Oh yes, there's no doubt whatsoever that they were telling the truth.
The sheriff who was involved, Sheriff Fred Diamond, 2 nights later had his own UFO sighting.
These things weren't beings, they were robots.
Yeah.
And I believe the beings that has contacted me since then was the beings that were controlling these robots.
If his fantasies are fact, it is the greatest threat to the well-being of the people of this nation.
I think they'd had a drink. That's just what I think about them.
Great trailer, great intro. Love it. You do great work, Darcy.
Thank you. But yeah, I've built, I think, a strong network of people that help me complete these stories that I embark upon talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know,
what stood out to you about this story? Why did you choose to make a documentary about the Pascagoula case?
Well, to be honest, this individual, the British individual featured in the trailer, who focused, you know, he kind of functions as a narrator to the backstory of this whole phenomenon, to this case. His name's Philip Mantle. He reached out to me and really campaigned that I work with him on the story. So I eventually was like, okay. And I traveled to Europe and met up with him in actually the UK and filmed. And then I got back from that and started assembling. And it's a 4-part docu-series. Each episode is about an hour long. The first episode covers Charlie Hickson's encounter with the phenomenon and his perspective of what happened and how he perceived what it really meant and what it was. The second episode is Calvin Parker's. The third episode are these new 2 witnesses that came forward, Maria and Jerry Blair. And the fourth episode is kind of like a biography on Philip Mantle, a ufologist based out of the UK, who, you know, how he got into this subject, like how he started researching it, how he eventually came to abduction phenomenon that was happening over there, and then how he eventually started covering this case and getting involved with these guys. So how I make these docs is a lot of guerrilla filmmaking and then a lot of editing and finding the documentation and the facts to expose certain ideas that are presented in the stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What was the effect this experience had on Charles and Calvin?
I would say it was pretty great. Both of them went through ontological shock to varying degrees. The first one that really springboarded themselves to the public regarding the case was Charlie Hickson. He was elder. You know, he was 42 years old when this happened. And he had been through certain life experiences that allowed him to perceive it a certain way, I think. And then his story.
What were those?
What kind of life experiences?
Yeah. What do you think helped prepare him to perceive it?
Well, I would just say like we talked about the shock level that these 2 men went through. And I think the shock that Charlie went through was lesser because he had served in the Korean War, thought he was going to die over there, survived it, came back. So he was basically able to deal with mental stressors to a greater degree because he had lived a life. And Calvin Parker, he was 19. He was just a baby, you know, boy, basically, or a young man. And he did not engage with the public very often on this. He was very quiet about it. He went from job to job, apparently, because news reporters and people that wanted to follow the story would kind of follow him, and he wanted to get away from it. And he would come out to talk about this when he became older and represent the subject a bit further once he was more comfortable, I'd say. He had lived a life, you know? He wanted to live a life. And he didn't want his whole life to be surrounding this subject.
Do you think it was the abduction experience he claims to have had, or was it the public media surge of interest and attention that was most difficult for him?
I think it was both. I think with the public media surge, he just wasn't ready for that. And then on top of it, maybe he wasn't able to fully comprehend what he went through and articulate that as a young man, like Charlie was able to. And so as he became older, more confident, and understood what happened to him a bit better, then he started talking about it more.
Okay. Are there any insights about the abduction phenomenon from the film or from this case that you think are most kind of apropos and important to call out?
Yeah, I think that what's very interesting about this case is that they were fully awake the whole time. And a lot of abductions that have happened in the past, I've talked about before in other interviews. You've got Travis Walton, Betty and Barney Hill. You got J. Christopher King, who's somebody that's, quite open and newer in terms of as a really interesting abductee.
One situation that I recall that really helped unlock recognizing that I needed to deal with my history with anomalous phenomena was a situation where I was in Miami for a wedding with my ex-wife, and we had a shared experience where I was looking out the window of this high-rise that we were in, and there was an illuminated swimming pool down below. I was looking at it, and for some reason, about 5 or 6 stories down between where I was and the pool, there was this ball of electricity that just appeared out of nowhere exactly where I was looking. And I just thought, uh-oh, this is not good. And seemingly this ball, maybe it was about the size of a basketball or so, it started slightly moving and growing in size towards where I was. I called my wife over, and she saw it out the window. And right as she saw it, it moved very quickly towards our position. And she turned around to run away from it. And as she did, she was seemingly rendered unconscious. And I had to move to grab her head so it didn't hit the floor on her way down. And when I turned around, there were 2 non-human entities. And strangely, I know it sounds very weird, they were standing outside the window in some way, as if there was some overlapping realm that they were on. And as had happened at other times in the past, I was somehow moved over to kind of an operating theater. And I was laid down on a slab that was seemingly levitating, and there was some kind of medical procedure happening. And I woke up in the morning with part of my suit still on top of the covers in the bed, and my then wife was just staring at my face. She had already woken up. And I was like, "Can we talk about this?" She was like, "No, we can't talk about this." And I realized that that relationship was not going to work. And I realized that the way that I was handling this stuff was not going to work. Because denying that it was happening or acting like I wasn't an experiencer didn't make it go away. And so I had separated from my wife, and I started researching these subjects. And now, here I am, about 12 years later.
A lot of the cases have missing time, meaning it's almost like a mental block that I don't know if it's been inserted or the brain has put that there for the betterment and survival of the organism. But that's common. Medical procedures are common, follow-up communications and stuff, lineage, like genetic lineage, apparently other family members, this tends to happen to. These are all sort of commonly held beliefs within that part of ufology. And, it was popularized by people like Bud Hopkins, Dr. David Jacobs. But with these guys, they were fully awake and aware. There was no missing time, so to speak. And they did do hypnosis, but it was more to make them comfortable in order to talk about these experiences. that they were not.
It wasn't to regress or regain memory. It was to kind of soothe the nervous system so that they could express what they consciously recalled. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you go to a therapist because you need help mentally, you typically speak to somebody who's able to help you unpack certain things, and they get you to a comfortable state in which you can.
Right.
And then they help you comprehend it. Right. I think with these hypnosis sessions, they were serving to make the individuals comfortable. And therefore they could discuss what happened to them better. That's the way I perceive it.
Yeah.
I think there's standouts about the case regarding the beings or the entities that they interacted with that seem to point to something different. Many contactees or experiencers have described like a varying degree of non-human intelligence. And this is definitely one where we'd never heard of something that had like elephant-like skin, spiky.
The morphology of reported creatures was way different from a lot of other abduction cases.
Exactly.
And they described them as robots, right? Or as mechanical.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of strikes me as relevant to theories of maybe X-ray to tempestre explanations for the phenomenon. So people like Michael P. Masters, who unpack an idea that maybe some of these craft are actually time machines from the future, and the occupants are human 2.0 or 3.0. We interpret them as non-human because we're human 1.0 and we haven't gone through that transition. But there's, the idea that these things are robots carrying out a scientific mission kind of fits with that idea in my mind. And telepathy was experienced by them, future projections of chaos and war, like a lot of that stuff.
That's very typical in the abduction.
Very typical, right? And I think it's something we shouldn't overlook. It's kind of like a warning, right?
Yeah. One thing that struck me about this case, Calvin the Younger, from what I recall, and I have not seen this documentary yet, but I look forward to it with my wife. I'll watch it. Is that he was emotionally impacted for much of his life by this experience, like deeply. And, a lot of professional psychologists might look at that and say, well, we can't definitively say what exactly happened to them, but we can definitely say that something happened such that it impacted them dramatically. I know the psychologist who worked with Bud Hopkins on his book regarding the Copley Woods cases described this as a trauma of major proportions. And she personally interviewed a number of the people who went through the process of, recovering the memory of what happened. And she found them all of sane mind, but all having undergone something very much akin to PTSD specific to this one incident in his book. So, for those who say this is all, speculation or creative imagination or a mass delusion, a mind virus, they have to understand that people are reporting conscious recollections that have lifelong impacts upon them. And wouldn't we want to know what that is? Wouldn't we have due diligence to understand what that is?
Yeah, 100%. I want to keep figuring out that truth and finding out, because look, if one of these cases is real, then it changes our reality completely.
Biggest event in human history right there.
Yeah. So there's, and I mean, in this series, we cover all kinds of facts and details that have not been fully covered before. Like there have been TV show documentaries dedicated to the case and stuff like that. And it kind of recounts what they said happened, but it doesn't uncover a lot of the witnesses, external to them that saw the phenomenon on nights previous or afterwards, and reports that come from the Coast Guard and the Navy and all kinds of the Air Force being involved in investigating it eventually, right? Like if nothing happened, then there wouldn't have been that many people that saw or interacted in some way with the phenomenon during that time.
Right. These mass multiple witness events are very compelling. You know, the aerial school encounter in Southern Africa. I mean, wow. I mean, to be seen by that many children reporting that many independent experiences right after the fact, having that emotional impact on them, which it did, it clearly rocked their sense of safety, their sense of the world around them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very compelling. You know, Darcy, what do you think is going on with this abduction phenomenon and the reports and allegations that people are being taken in these ways? What's your assessment at this point?
I think it's very plausible that there's some kind of scientific mission being conducted, you know, to carry out research on the organism that is a human being. Sometimes, you know, there could be different intelligence linked to this type of activity. And different experiences. You know, people say that there's like out of body experiences of abduction, you know, more of like a consciousness taking. And then there's people that have the physical. They're on board crafts or they're inside of bases and stuff like that. And I mean, it's wild. But could it be true?
Right. And if it were, or even if some of it, part of it was true, what would that say to you about the NHI themselves? What would be the viable kind of explanations for their motive for engaging people in that way?
That they're like us because we do the same thing to organisms all around the planet. I mean, we capture dolphins, whales, chimpanzees, bears, tigers, whatever, and we examine, tag, release back into the wild. Like this is an age-old method to understand things. And it seems to be a method conducted by higher intelligence, possibly on us.
Yes. And, you know, one thing I might call out there, though, is, you know, to conduct an experiment, how many individuals do you need to take and over what time period? You know, it looks, you know, by some accounts that millions of people have been engaged in this way. The Roper poll done by Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs in collaboration found an estimate of 2 million Americans might have been exposed to something akin to an abduction event. So, I mean, my goodness, that's quite a program of study if it's taking that many people over that period of time. And then internationally, who even knows?
Yeah.
I remember coming across a pastor in Puerto Rico who claimed that the majority of the people in his congregation say they have been abducted by aliens.
Wow.
Right.
Can you introduce me to that pastor?
Sure. Yes. I'll send you that link. But I mean, you hear accounts like that. It's like, what kind of science experiment, you know, abducts everyone in the congregation or takes millions of people over 60 years? It might be not just for the pure novelty of understanding, but out of some kind of programmatic desire to genetically engage with humanity in some way.
Yeah. And there are aspects of the genetic engagement that you're discussing with regard to all of these abductions stories. There's material extracted, reproductive material, eggs said to be harvested, and sperm, sexual interactions sometimes, you know, blood taken. And that's what we do sometimes. Right. And so,
I mean, often under medical consent and informed awareness as to the procedure being done. But yes, to animals, we certainly do that and much more.
Without consent. Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, it just all points to some kind of intelligence that might be interacting with us. And to unpack all that, it kind of exemplifies maybe motives or intentions or abilities that these interests have.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, I think it's plausible to imagine NHI don't share our values, right? They don't, our intent is not necessarily complementary to theirs. So it seems we're at this threshold if we're going to become aware that an NHI is present in the world interacting with humanity, we have to understand the interaction that's taken place. And I thank you for documentaries like this, because that's what that is. That's documenting a potential interaction. But then we have to articulate a human set of values or rules of engagement and then negotiate those with these actors, because they may not perceive what they're doing as, quote, wrong, right? That's a value statement. Doing these procedures upon people may be, order of the day to them. We might be cattle in the field, ants in the forest floor to them. So it's really on us to articulate what can and cannot happen in the human space, and then find ways of enforcing those policies on behalf of public safety. So I think we're at the beginning, early foothills of climbing those bigger mountains into the phenomenon.
I agree.
Yeah. Looking ahead, Darcy, what do you see in the next 5 to 10 years in the UFO conversation, research, investigation, for yourself, for the majority?
Yeah, I think, just certain topics we've even discussed today together. There are things that I'm unpacking in other stories I'm putting together regarding the phenomenon. And then I wish I had a looking glass or, a crystal ball to tell exactly what the future will hold. But I hope that the public discourse and the, understanding of the phenomenon is better scientifically scrutinized, and more information is released from those powers that be that we discussed earlier, that helps us conceptualize this stuff in a sane manner.
Yeah, for sure. And in lieu of that, what do you think the UFO community can do in terms of research and investigation? Where's the next place to go look, or to look deeper than we have looked?
I think, trying to hold back from saying that they understand the truth completely is the best way to approach, because even with my journey, I thought I knew everything early on, and a lot of the stuff has changed since then. So just being reluctant to dive completely in and subscribe or follow certain thought leaders is very important. Like, anybody who says that they know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and that they're going to guide you through that process, they typically will have some kind of
ulterior motives.
Motives that will incentivize themselves by you doing that. So, yeah, I would say
just press you a little further on this question, because I know you are an investigator, and like, where would you look next to uncover key information about the phenomenon? Would it be looking deeper into the abduction phenomenon? Would it be gathering multi-sensor data as a citizen UAP detection effort? What do you think is kind of the most fruitful endeavor to better understand the nature of the phenomenon?
Yeah. So speaking with scientists and people that actually understand the human brain, that understand the consciousness, the science behind consciousness, and our abilities as humans, and the engaging with the sociological reality of all of this stuff. So, we were just talking about the community and us as beings, interpreting it and prescribing to certain ideas and notions. This is all sociological, right? Like, and I went to university and studied film and sociology, right? So I'm going to continue to try and interact with the phenomenon in terms of studying properly concrete notions and perspectives that can be proven.
Right. Good stuff. And then one more question is, when you see mainstream film media interface with the phenomenon, whatever that is, in the movie, Hollywood setting, independent film setting, or even in the news media, how do you see that taking place? How is mainstream society dealing with or grappling with NHI And do you see that trend changing at all with the recent disclosures or the recent congressional hearings, for example? Or is it kind of like it was in the early 2000s? Not much change.
Well, I think it's changed a lot since the early 2000s, because the way that we used to consume media was like very traditional. Newspapers, magazines, a little bit of radio mixed in with television and, online articles and stuff. Nowadays, it's like all online. Streaming services have replaced television. And radio is now podcasts. Like the biggest podcasts in the world end up being thought leaders presenting on these ideas, like Joe Rogan and,
much more space for independent voices,
there's
now
less,
than in the past.
I think like YouTube has become almost like public access television, and allows for independents to create and present certain ideas. Rumble, a lot of these, X, for example, they're becoming news and information networks socially. So the landscape has really changed.
The nature of the coverage, has that changed in your experience? The way NHI, aka Alien, because that's the word most often used, is depicted?
Yeah. So just in the past 6 months, there has aired like from these major streaming networks, Netflix, Apple TV, like Apple Plus,
MGM,
Disney. Disney has the National Geographic series produced by Leslie Kean, and Netflix has what's it called? The George Knapp.
Investigation Alien.
And then you've got on HBO Discovery, Encounters, and all of these really
surge of coverage.
Yeah, surge of coverage from the mainstream. So I think this is further going mainstream, and the ability for people to discern the truth from fact or from hoax or fiction is going to be more important than ever, because people are going to be going through this like ontologic shock. They're being onboarded into this community, like never before.
Right. And you never know the narrative that might be put out there. For example, they're just coming here, they're just arriving now, or they're coming in 20, 30 something. And little do people really know that they've been here all along. They've been here for over a century. So I think the need for really good voices in the UFO community to speak loud and hard at that moment is really important in my view. But the coverage, I wonder if this is kind of like a canary in the coal mine situation where it's like, the media power brokers, they can sense a wave coming before it comes, and they want to be the first to put out that documentary or that media Hollywood piece. So it's kind of like, are they sensing the oncoming storm of disclosure?
Bit of that probably happening, but there has been pushback by the mainstream media, like newspapers, New York Times, National Posts and stuff, Inquirer, all that. These guys have, ridiculed the subject for decades, and it's starting to loosen up a bit, but they're still very skeptical about what's going on, which is fine. We need skepticism, and we need to debunk the hoaxes and stuff so people don't get taken in by that. But I think the media landscape is going to allow for more of that to happen than ever.
Yeah, we shall see. Interesting times. I know with this statement from the House Oversight on the formation of a declassification task force, that's new grounds upon which to have the conversation. It's kind of like the Overton window just got a nice chiropractic adjustment and ratcheted several notches to the left, or to the right. I'm not sure which, but how do you see things after that statement, and what's your kind of sense of the next year or two in the disclosure landscape?
let's see what actually is done. Let's not get ahead of ourselves and, think that they're going to provide the keys to the car and let us drive away with it. Let's actually see what they provide first. Everybody thought Arrow was going to be huge, and it just became this kind of like almost disinformation campaign and debunker sort of effort to delegitimize any of the phenomenon, if possible.
It's been called a fly paper operation. Come with your evidence, come with your reports, and then those people get neutralized. Or a Project Blue Book 2.0, but just the next round in the effort to sweep things under the carpet.
Yeah, I think that committee being set up was an effort to buy back trust from society, because everybody's become basically conspiratorial or distrusting of the powers that be at this point post-COVID. So you're going to have this new establishment that's trying to reconcile and build that trust back. Otherwise, how does a country operate without having that trust with the people that are funding the government, right? So that's part of it. Let's see what they actually provide to buy back that trust and let us understand what's going on.
Right. Yeah. I think the public needs to grant the governing bodies a little bit more grace to bring it forward, and we'll see if they do. But trust is a key thing in this disclosure equation. Well, Darcy, thank you so much for being on the show with me. Great conversation. How can folks watch your documentaries and access your media?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Reed. It's been a great convo. Let's keep in touch. And definitely they can find my work from my studio site, occultjourneys.com, and just search my name on Amazon Prime, Darcy Weir, or Roku, or Tubi TV. There's multiple places where my content is actually free or very cheap, like 99 cents or something to watch a feature
great
expose.
And free to watch in the US. I believe I heard you say on another interview.
One of the a lot of my stuff is. So, love for people to reach out if they want to reach me on social media. My Twitter is @OccultJourneys. My Facebook is just my name, and then Instagram is @Darcy Weir Films. Let's connect. Thanks for allowing me to speak to your people.
Great, Darcy. Wonderful to have you, and I will be in touch, and we'll talk soon, I'm sure. So thank you, everyone, for joining me and Darcy on Emergent. It's been a pleasure being with you here, and I look forward to a number of great conversations to come. I've got all sorts of great guests in the wings. Chris Grooms will be on the show this Friday. Joff Cruikshank, Joshua Pearson, and Jason Guillemette, all important voices on the UAP topic, will be on the show in the next couple weeks. So stay tuned. And Emergent remains bi-weekly, although it's not going to be live every week, every episode, I should say, where I'm going to be alternating between going live with myself in more of a solo format, and then a pre-recorded premiere of the episodes that I'll be recording with these excellent guests. So Friday, 9:00 Eastern, Emergent will be out with a new episode. So thank you so much for being with me here in the studio, and I look forward to our next time together as we continue to examine the front lines of our potential contact with the non-human intelligence. So these are big days, and this will be a big year, I think, in the effort for government transparency on the issue. So your being here and being in the fight is all the more important. So with that, thank you so much, and I will see you down the road.